May 1, 1943. 27,000 feet above Saint-Nazaire, France. The Boeing B-17 flying fortress shudders violently as German flak bursts tear through the afternoon sky. Inside the fuselage of aircraft 649, the air reeks of cordite and hydraulic fluid. 23-year-old Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith crouches behind his .50 caliber machine gun in the ball turret position, watching black puffs of death bloom around his aircraft like poisonous flowers. A direct hit. Metal screams. Fire erupts through the radio room. The aircraft lurches downward, trailing smoke and flame across the French coastline. 9 men aboard. No parachutes within reach for half of them. 20,000 feet to fall. And one gunner who would refuse to leave his burning plane. In the spring of 1943, the Allied air campaign over occupied Europe stood at a crossroads. The combined bomber offensive, a systematic assault on Nazi Germany's industrial capacity, had only just begun. American B-17 flying fortresses, flying in tight combat box formations, struck deep into Hitler's fortress Europe by day, while British bombers attacked by night. The strategy was sound. The cost was staggering. Without long-range fighter escorts, these 4-engine bombers faced German Luftwaffe interceptors alone. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s swarmed like wolves, exploiting blind spots, targeting engines, killing crews. The average life expectancy of an 8th Air Force bomber crew member was 15 missions. A full tour of duty required 25. The mathematics were merciless. Most men would not survive. Maynard Smith joined this war in the winter of 1943. Born in Cairo, Michigan in 1911, he was older than most recruits, 31 years old when he enlisted. He had drifted through the Depression working odd jobs. Dishwasher, clerk, laborer. He was short, 5'4", quick-tempered, unremarkable in every measurable way except one. He had volunteered. Basic training at Keesler Field, Mississippi. Gunnery school at Harlingen, Texas. By April 1943, he found himself assigned to the 423rd Bombardment Squadron, 306th Bombardment Group, stationed at Thurley Airfield in Bedfordshire, England. His crewmates gave him a nickname that stuck, Snuffy, after a comic strip character. Small, scrappy, persistent. They had no idea what he was capable of. The mission briefing on the morning of May 1st revealed the target. The U-boat pens at Saint-Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast. These massive concrete shelters housed Germany's submarine fleet, the Wolfpack strangling Allied supply convoys across the Atlantic. Destroying them would save thousands of merchant sailors. It would also require flying through some of the most heavily defended airspace in occupied Europe. 64 B-17s took off that morning into overcast skies. Smith flew aboard aircraft number 649, christened with no name, no nose art, just a number. He manned the ball turret, a plexiglass sphere suspended beneath the fuselage, barely large enough for a man to curl inside, armed with twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns. It was a coffin with a view. The formation crossed the English Channel. German radar tracked them from the moment they left British airspace. By the time they reached the French coast, the Luftwaffe was waiting. The first fighters appeared at 1,420 hours. Bf-109s, diving from the sun. Their 20mm cannons hammered the formation. Tracer rounds sliced through the air like horizontal rain. The B-17s returned fire, their combined firepower creating overlapping fields of death. German fighters broke off, reformed, attacked again. Saint-Nazaire's anti-aircraft batteries opened up at 27,000 feet. 88mm shells burst in black clouds, each explosion capable of shredding aluminum and flesh alike. The air became solid with shrapnel. Pilots held formation, flying straight and level through the storm. Any deviation would throw off the bombardiers. Any deviation meant the mission failed. Smith rotated his turret, tracking targets, firing controlled bursts. Spent shell casings rattled around his feet in the cramped sphere. The noise was apocalyptic. Engines roaring, guns hammering, explosions pounding. His breath fogged the plexiglass in the freezing air. Then he saw it. A Focke-Wulf FW-190, painted gray and green, peeling away from a stricken B-17 to their right. The enemy fighter's nose swung toward aircraft 649. Smith pressed his triggers. His guns jammed. At precisely 1,437 hours, 3 20mm explosive shells struck the rear section of aircraft 649. One detonated in the radio room. One tore through the waist gun position. One ignited the oxygen system. Fire erupted instantly. The aircraft's intercom exploded with shouting. Smoke filled the fuselage. The radio operator, Staff Sergeant Robert McCallum, staggered forward, his flight suit smoldering. Behind him, the entire rear section of the aircraft had become an inferno. Flames fed by pure oxygen roared through the radio compartment, consuming maps, equipment, ammunition boxes. Lieutenant Lewis Johnson, the pilot, fought the controls. The aircraft yawed hard to the right, falling out of formation. Without the protective firepower of the group, they were dead. German fighters circled like sharks sensing blood. Staff Sergeant Roy Gibson, the tail gunner, called over the intercom. His voice was remarkably calm. In the ball turret below, Maynard Smith made a decision. He cranked the manual wheel, rotating the turret to its neutral position. Squeezed through the narrow opening into the fuselage. Emerged into hell. The radio room was gone. In its place, a tunnel of flame stretching 15 feet toward the tail. Metal glowed red. Ammunition cooked off in staccato bursts. The slipstream from bullet holes and shrapnel tears howled through the broken aircraft, feeding the fire with hurricane-force wind. Every instinct screamed at him to bail out. The waist gunners had already gone. He could see their parachutes blossoming in the sky below through the gaping wounds in the fuselage. Smart men. Trained men. Following procedure. Smith looked toward the tail section where Gibson was trapped. He looked toward the cockpit where the pilot fought to keep them airborne. He looked at the fire. Then he grabbed an extinguisher. The fire roared. Smith squeezed the extinguisher trigger. White foam sprayed across burning metal. Useless. The oxygen-fed flames consumed it instantly. He threw the empty canister aside. Grabbed another. Foam. Nothing. The heat seared his face. His lungs burned with each breath. Ammunition exploded. A .50 caliber round detonated 6 inches from his head. Shrapnel peppered his back. He didn't stop. He ripped off his gloves. Grabbed smoldering blankets with bare hands. Threw them out through shell holes in the fuselage. The slipstream tore them away. His palms blistered. He reached for more. Behind him, a parachute pack caught fire. Then another. The smoke turned black and toxic. Smith dropped to his knees, coughing, half-blind. He crawled forward. Found buckets used for relieving oneself during long missions. Filled them with coffee from a shattered thermos. Hurled the liquid onto the flames. The fire spread toward the tail wheel assembly. If it reached the hydraulic lines, they would lose all control. If it reached the tail gunner, Gibson would burn alive. Smith could hear him over the intercom, still firing at German fighters, still doing his job. Smith looked at the flames blocking the passage. 15 feet of fire. No protective gear. No backup. No time. He took a breath of thin air and charged through. The heat hit him like a physical blow. His flight jacket caught fire. He beat it out with his hands. Kept moving. Reached the tail section. Found Gibson, still manning his guns. His section intact but isolated by the inferno. Gibson nodded. His eyes wide with shock at seeing anyone come through that hell. Smith turned back toward the radio room. The fire had grown. He'd have to go through it again. He grabbed more blankets. Wrapped them around himself. Prepared to run. Over the intercom, Lieutenant Johnson's voice crackled. The B-17 steadied. The bombardier took control. Smith felt the aircraft level out, flying straight into the flak, giving the Germans a perfect target. Procedure. Discipline. The mission came first. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly lighter by 4,000 pounds. Johnson banked hard, turning for home. The formation had already left them behind. They were alone. Smith fought the fire for another 20 minutes. He used anything he could find. Coffee. water from canteens, urine from relief tubes, his own spit. He tore burning debris loose and threw it out through holes in the fuselage. When his hands became too burned to grip, he used his feet. When the extinguishers ran dry, he smothered flames with his body. The oxygen bottles had emptied. The ammunition had cooked off. The slipstream had carried away the fuel. Smith had eliminated everything combustible that remained. The metal still glowed red. Smoke still poured through the cabin. But the flames had stopped advancing. Only then did he notice the German fighter. An FW-190 had followed them, waiting for the crippled bomber to fall. It came in from 5 o'clock low. Smith staggered to the left waist gun position. The previous gunner had bailed out, leaving the weapon unmanned. Smith grabbed the handles, swung the barrel toward the target. His burned hands could barely grip the triggers. The .50 caliber rounds walked across the fighter's wing root. Metal tore. The FW-190 rolled hard and dove away, trailing smoke. Whether Smith shot it down or merely drove it off, no one ever confirmed. He didn't care. He collapsed against the gun mount, his hands destroyed, his lungs seared, his flight suit burned and torn. But the aircraft was still flying. Aircraft 649 limped across the English Channel at 12,000 feet, losing altitude, streaming smoke. Lieutenant Johnson nursed the damaged bomber toward England with 2 engines damaged and the entire electrical system compromised. The aircraft stank of burned rubber and flesh. Smith made his way forward to the radio room, or what remained of it. Every surface was scorched black. Equipment had melted into abstract sculptures. Shell casings had fused to the floor. He found his position destroyed, the ball turret mechanism damaged beyond repair. He'd never be able to get back inside it. So he stayed in the waist, manning the gun, watching for fighters. His hands had swollen to twice their normal size. He could feel nothing but pain. But his fingers still worked the triggers. The English coast appeared through the haze. Bedford. The Lee Airfield. Home. Johnson brought the bomber in without hydraulics, landing on 2 flat tires, the aircraft slewing sideways before grinding to a halt at the end of the runway. Fire trucks raced toward them. Ambulances followed. The crew climbed out through the forward hatch. Then the pilot. Then the co-pilot. Then the navigator. Then the bombardier. Maynard Smith emerged last, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, his face black with soot, his hands wrapped in torn cloth. He looked at the aircraft he'd saved. 2/3 of it was destroyed. The tail section hung by cables. The radio room was a burned-out shell. The ground crew stared in disbelief that anything had survived in that wreckage. Smith walked to the debriefing without assistance. When asked what happened, he gave a 3-sentence report. Fire in the aircraft. The intelligence officer pressed for details. Smith shrugged. 3 weeks later, General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, stood before the assembled crews at Lee Airfield. In his hand, he held a citation signed by President Franklin Roosevelt. Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith was awarded the Medal of Honor, the first enlisted man in the 8th Air Force to receive America's highest military decoration. Smith stood at attention as the medal was pinned to his chest. 5'4", 32 years old, a former dishwasher who'd spent most of his life drifting from job to job. The story spread through the bomber groups like wildfire. Snuffy Smith, who fought a fire at 27,000 feet with his bare hands, who saved his aircraft, who saved his crew, who refused to quit when quitting was the only rational choice. Smith flew 24 more missions. He survived them all. When his tour ended in August 1943, he returned to the United States for a war bond tour. He hated it. The speeches, the ceremonies, the photographers who wanted him to smile while holding his medal. After the war, he returned to civilian life. He worked as a tax examiner, married, raised a family. He rarely spoke about May 1, 1943. When pressed, he repeated the same line. I did what anybody would do. But the records tell a different story. Of the 64 B-17s that attacked Saint-Nazaire that day, 12 were shot down. 120 men killed or captured. Hundreds more wounded. Aircraft 649 should have been the 13th loss. Because one gunner refused to abandon his aircraft. Because one man decided that his crew mattered more than his survival. Because when fire and death filled the sky, Maynard Smith did not run toward the escape hatch. The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its nickname through missions exactly like Saint-Nazaire. It brought crews home through damage that should have been fatal. But the aircraft was only metal and rivets. The strength came from the men inside. Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith died on May 11, 1984, 41 years almost to the day after his moment in the burning sky. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His Medal of Honor was placed in the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where it remains on display. Aircraft 649 never flew again. The damage was too severe. It was stripped for parts and scrapped. No memorial marks where it fell. No plaque commemorates its survival. But the story endures. In every military survival course, instructors teach the same lesson Smith demonstrated that day. Panic kills. Training saves. But sometimes, survival requires something neither panic nor training can provide. It requires a choice. The choice to stay when leaving is justified. The choice to fight when surrender is rational. The choice to care about others when self-preservation screams louder than duty. Smith never claimed to be a hero. He insisted he was ordinary. A small man doing a small job in the largest war in history. Heroes are not born in comic books or movies. They're born in burning aircraft over France. When ordinary men make extraordinary choices. When dishwashers become warriors. When the forgotten become unforgettable. The sky above Saint-Nazaire is quiet now. The flak batteries are silent. The fighters are grounded. The submarines are museum pieces. But somewhere in that empty air, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the sound of a small man fighting a fire with his bare hands. Still refusing to quit. Still doing his job. Still flying toward home.